I'm gonna give a quick intro, and then Friedel is gonna do the presentation. I'm Nicola, and I work at Protocol Labs and in Filecoin research. And Filecoin research is a part of Protocol Labs that works to advance Filecoin proofs, the Filecoin blockchain protocol, and we do both research that is critical to Filecoin, but also research which is more long-term. And Friedel today will talk about what we do in particular on the Filecoin proofs, which proofs of storage, that he will dive into the details. There is some work that Friedel will not mention, so I will quickly go around it and saying that there are areas that relate to consensus protocols and how to integrate proofs, proof of space and consensus protocol, and how to make these proofs more practical is active. So feel free to ask any question later. And one last thing that I want to mention is that we've been collaborating with a lot of different groups, and the Filecoin research team is more like a crypto lab, which does research internally, but also is an ecosystem player. In other words, we've been giving RFP grants for doing more research in SNARKs and proof of space, and we also give grants to developers that want to look into more experimental aspects of Filecoin.
Thank you, Nicola. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk about SNARKs and Filecoin tonight, especially why Filecoin loves SNARKs and why we love SNARKs and why we're looking for help on making them even better. Why? Computers. No. Okay, now it works. Yeah. The subtitle of the talk is why Filecoin needs you to make zk-SNARKs faster. Yeah, as Nicola mentioned, I'm Friedel. I go by Dignified Quire on the internet, and I work on Filecoin most of my time for PL. Specifically, a large portion of my time is spent working on proof of storage and implementing them. All right, before we go deep into things, I'm going to cover a little bit about what is Filecoin, what we're trying to achieve, and then go deep into like why is zk-SNARKs relevant for us. Filecoin's goal is to create a decentralized, efficient, and robust foundation for humanity's information. This is an ambitious goal, and we have picked a certain set of tools today to make that a reality. And these happen to include, at the very far end, SNARKs. So where are the SNARKs in that statement, right? So if we look at Filecoin at a very high level, we have that foundation for humanity's information. But if we look at how we actually build that out, the first part of that is building a decentralized storage network. I'll go a little bit deeper into what that is in a moment. But this storage network uses a blockchain under the hood effectively to actually work. And this blockchain in turn uses proofs of useful space to carry certain guarantees and to ensure things are as they seem to be. And these proofs of useful space, now they require zk-SNARKs today to work, or at least that is the best building block we've found so far to make these work well for our use case. Important note here that is we use zk-SNARKs. We use mostly the SNARK part. We don't use the zero knowledge proof, the zero knowledge part. We are mostly relying on the succinct part, meaning that we need proofs that are very small. Now, I mentioned Filecoin is built using a decentralized storage network, and the idea here is that everybody can become a storage provider by providing storage on the network, but the clients don't need to trust the providers, whereas like a centralized storage network, you would have like always, you have to you just trust that provider. That's a big difference here. But if you try to build such a network, what you run into is that you have to solve the fair exchange problem, but unfortunately, there's an impossibility result here, which means you have to have a trusted third party. And this is where blockchain comes in, because you can use the blockchain as that trusted third party to go around this problem. And so we use a blockchain that has uses a storage-based consensus, which is different than most of the consensus protocols used today. And as you can imagine, a little bit like proof of stake, where you have a method of gaining power in a network, which will enable you to mine blocks. But the method of gaining power in this blockchain is that you use useful proofs of storage to gain that power. Now, to make that actually work, we need the mentioned proofs of useful space. Useful space. What is the important? Why are proofs of useful space relevant here? So the usefulness aspect that is critical here is that we want to build this market, and this market only can work if people actually provide space that you can actually use, right? So if you can't store any files on that in this space, then it's very useless, and you can't have a nice market. And the important part of storing that is proving that that space actually is used and exists is important, because we use these for the consensus mechanism. And if you really need to be sure that if somebody gains power, that they actually can back that up. Now, before we dive deep into the actual proofs, I'm going to cover the three big attacks that we need to keep in mind when looking at these proofs that we need to defend against, and will make it easier to understand a little bit why certain things work as they do. The first one is the Sybil attack. The Sybil attack is when when a malicious miner pretends to store copies of your data in multiple different identities, but actually they only keep a single copy of your data. And so you would, for example, pay for 3 replicas, but in reality, the miner is only a single identity, not 3 miners, and they only store 1 replica. And so they both gain more power, and they triple their revenue from you in a malicious way. The second attack is what we call an outsourcing attack. Outsourcing attack means that the miner pretends to store your data, but what they actually do is after they receive it, they actually just delete the data and rely on other miners to also store your data. So if they know that there's another miner who also stores that data, they just rely on that miner, and so they can, again, fake their actual amount of storage that they provide, but also gain the profits from you, even though they don't actually provide its service to you. And then the third attack is a generation attack, which a miner can pay themselves to store certain data, and so they can store, they can pretend to store a large amount of data, whereas the data is not actually large, but it's just generated based on a very small seed. And so they only have to keep the small seed instead of the large data around. And so while paying yourself doesn't give you a profit, this does help you in gaining more power in the network. And so you can gain more power in the network, even though you don't actually have the space. So let's look a little bit at proof of replication. There are 2 big proofs in Filecoin, and I'm going to mainly talk about proof of replication as it's going to be the most critical for tonight to understand and most helpful. So proof of replication is the proof that is used in the initial replication of the data from a claim to miner. So let's look a little bit of a timeline of how that would work out. From both the prover perspective, who you can think of as the storage miner, and then the verifier, who is the client who wants to store some data, and then an attacker who would be would be a malicious miner. And so at the beginning, our client verifier has a file and they send it out. And the same happens, both the prover or the attacker would receive that file. Now, the honest prover would now start a sealing process, which is the encoding, we call the encoding process, that happens to the file to ensure that certain properties are met. The attacker just sits idly there and does nothing for now, which is already a big benefit for them if things work out. Now, the verifier has an understanding of how long roughly this should take, and they will eventually send a challenge out to make sure that that sealing process actually was successful. They want a proof of that, and so they send that challenge, and the honest prover now starts using their their sealed data to prove that they actually have done their storage part correctly. Now, they have that proof, they send it back to the verifier, and the verifier is happy. They check that out, and things are fine. Now, the attacker, on the other hand, in order to generate that proof, they need to first seal the data before they can validate it. That's such the challenge chosen. And so they start now the sealing process because they wanted to save space, and so they didn't do it earlier. But as you can see, this is going to take a lot longer than just proving that. And so what ends up happening is there's a verification timeout on the verifier side, chosen such that that happens before you could possibly seal the data during this period. And so when they actually are done with the process and send the proof back, the verifier knows that something is wrong and we can reject that proof. So we now can dive a little bit deeper into the sealing process and the verification process of proof replication. This is still going to be a high-level explanation and not the exact details of the networking, but it's much closer already than what we described before. So if we look at the part of the sealing that I mentioned before that our prover does, you can think of sealing as a function that takes in a depth bus graph, sector ID. So the part that the data that we seal, we chunk that into specified sizes, which we call sectors. And then the data, which is all the data in our sector. And then it returns a replica, which is the encoded data in some form, and com_r, which is a commitment to that specific replica, which is a small hash. The process goes roughly as follows. We start chunking our data into smaller chunks and mapping that onto that graph, and such that the first chunk maps, the nodes in our graph are numbered, and so the first chunk maps onto the first node, and so on. Then we start encoding the data in our form process. The encoding function works such that it takes as inputs the sector ID and the parents of a certain node, and the node. And so there's, in our graph is constructed such that there's always node 1, which is no parents. And so we can start encoding that because it doesn't have any prior encodings. And then we can encode, in this case, our node 2, which has 1 parent. The encoding function doesn't take the parent, it takes the encoded parent. That's important, right? Which is why we have to encode first. And so we have the encoded parent 1, we can the node 2, and now we can encode node 3, which is parents 1 and 2. And so we go through this process with it. And so now we take the graph, the data, the encoded data we have in our graph, move it back into our bytes, and then we have which is simply the root of the Merkle tree of that replica. And
Friedel,
okay.
I think you should,
if people can
go off
everybody hear me?
video while, because the sound is cutting.
All right, let me try that. Okay, I think it's better now.
Yeah, so far, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, cool. What was the last thing that you understood?
Could you repeat the parent encoding stuff?
So basically, so from here.
From like where like the DAGs, yeah, basically from like right there is where you cut out totally for me.
Oh no. Okay, yeah. I'll start. I'll just go continue from there. All right. So we have our mapping onto the graph, and now we start encoding the nodes one after the other. Then the encoding function works as such that it takes the encoded parents of a node, the sector ID, and the actual node itself to encode. And so we start with node 1, which has no parents. And then we start, and we can encode that. And then we can encode node 2 because we've encoded its parent, node 1. And then we can continue on to node 3, which is parents 1 and 2, because we've encoded that. And so we continue through the graph like that until we've encoded all the nodes. As you probably noticed, this requires a graph to have certain properties for this to work out. And the best graphs are exactly built like that, and this will work out. And so if we follow through, we end up having the whole graph encoded. Now we have our encoded graph, and we can map that into just a regular, as a replica, as just bytes back, the same way we map the original data into the graph, just in reverse. And now we have our replica, only the com-r, and the com-r is just constructed as the Merkle, the root hash of the Merkle tree of the whole replica. I think stable so far.
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay.
Okay, cool. All right. So show me the SNARKs. Hasselhoff talks shiny SNARKs, right? So let's see where we can find the SNARK. So the SNARK comes into play in our proof of replication in the challenge verification part aspect. So when you'll remember the graph from earlier, where on the timeline, the challenge gets sent, and then the proof gets generated by the prover. And this is the part that we're going to talk about now, which actually uses the SNARK. Proof of POREP is short for proof of replication. And so the proving part here takes the depth graph, the challenge, which we call C here, and the replica, which we just generated. So I'm going to run through this for a single challenge, which single challenge is just a node in that graph. But in reality, this will be many, many nodes that are challenged to get good security properties. Now, if we look what happens to a single node is like, in our case, this happens to be 5. And so 5 has these 2 parents in this graph. And so we build a proof in such a way that we take the encoded parents 1 and 2. We take the actual node, number 5, and then we also take from the original data the node number 5. And then to prove that those nodes were actually the nodes in this graph, we give Merkle inclusion proofs for each of these. So these are 3 Merkle inclusion proofs on the Merkle tree built on the replica, and then 1 on the Merkle tree built on the original data. Now, this is a proof, but as you can see, this is not tiny for a single challenge. Now, if you look at many challenges, you can see this quickly grows. And so this is where the SNARKs come in. And because what we effectively want to do is compress this proof as small as we possibly can. It turns out 192 bytes is pretty small. So let's see if we can do that. So our circuit that we're going to build is going to prove that we actually have constructed this proof correctly. And so the SNARK circuit that we use here checks 2 things. The first one it checks is that the encoding given these 2 parent nodes, these 2 encoded parent nodes, and this original data node actually matches into the encoding of the node in the replica. And then the second thing is it checks that all these 4 Merkle inclusion proofs are actually correct. And as such, we then have our SNARK proof at the end, which we then can actually store on chain, which is much smaller than if we had to ship many of these around. All right, so this all sounds really great, but we also still have some challenges to figure out, which we're actively working on. So I'm going to run through those, specifically 2 SNARKs in Filecoin, as we use them currently. So the process I described earlier, when I said many challenges, I really meant a lot of challenges. And so it turns out that this is quite a lot of work for SNARK. And so what we end up is that we have large circuits, which are quite expensive, both in generation time and in generation CPU cost. And so we're actively looking into how to make these both faster and to reduce simply the number of constraints given the operations that we need to run in a SNARK. Then for the second proof that is important for 500, it didn't go into detail, which is called proof of spacetime. We also would really like to use a VDF, but VDFs, RSA-based VDFs are quite tricky and expensive to verify in a SNARK. And so we're still looking for solutions to make that cheaper and alternative constructions to ensure that we can actually verify those. And then we're looking into 2 applications of aggregation and composition of SNARKs. One of them is there's a lot of repeated work because it's effectively the same circuit for each challenge, just many times over. So we're looking at circuit composition, SNARK composition for those, and then we're all to reduce the overall circuit size, and then also to possibly aggregate many proofs from multiple miners to reduce the on-chain storage costs even further. We've been working on and with similar approaches that are used already in zk-SNARKs, and trying to improve on those. Hope to use that in the future. And then we have some more challenges which go beyond zk-SNARKs. One of them is faster hash functions. So Merkle tree relies heavily and the inclusion proofs on hash functions, and we today use Peterson hashes, which is a hash function which is very efficient comparatively in a zk-SNARK, but unfortunately the way it's constructed, that means it's quite slow outside of the SNARK, which we have to run many times to build the Merkle trees. And so comparatively slow to standard hash functions like Blake and SHA-2. And so we're trying to find and improve on hash, both implementations and constructions that are hash functions that are fast inside and outside of SNARKs. And then we're also looking into improving vector commitments in general to replace the specific usage of our Merkle trees, which could alleviate that problem in a whole different way by basically removing that need there to hash that much. Yeah, and then to give you a really good understanding why we really need faster SNARKs, this is if we look at roughly the percentage today of where we spend our time in our sealing process, the actual encoding around the graph that I showed earlier is not that much time. We have a lot of time spent in Merkle tree generation, which is directly correlated to the faster hash function that I mentioned and the vector commitment work. And then a large chunk of this time is spent generating SNARK proofs. And so we really want GPU SNARKs and fast SNARKs that allow us to go further. And oh yeah. So this is a percentage accumulated if you break down the time it takes on a single CPU. So there are a lot of aspects that could be parallelized, and they often are parallelized, but the important part is like, this is the cost of like single CPU spread out in time. And then with that, I'll give it over to the Q&A section. So we're gonna be not alone, as you know. Nicola already introduced himself. And there's also Ariel here with me. They work with me on this, and so we're gonna now happy to answer all the questions you have around this. Just muted.
Hello, hello. I think this is probably we're on two different. Okay, we're on two different connections, so I think mine might be a better one to take questions. So if you feel free to ask any question, either we wanted to give an intro to Filecoin, where we are at with proofs and what parts of proofs use SNARKs and what type of optimization we want to look into, either engineering-wise or research-wise. But feel free to ask any question, both on Filecoin or how on SNARKs generically, or some particular optimization that you were thinking for the challenge, the code, the making SNARKs faster challenge.
I have a quick question for you guys. For people who want to dig into the implementation of our proofs, where's the best place for them to go? Could you maybe drop a link or show them the repo?
Yeah, so we're writing these proofs in Rust and right now, and they're okay. Friedel will do this. These proofs are implemented in Rust, and currently we use this the library called Bellman, which is originated from Zcash, and we're now supporting a fork. And Friedel will now. We're going to be sending the link in a second.
I had a question, guys. Can you hear me? Yeah. Just how about the performance of SNARKs? Like, how far do you feel it has to go? Like from where it is currently in 2019 to get kind of Filecoin, for example, running? Okay,
that's a very good question. So Friedel showed the different percentages, and this is a single core CPU. So it's not just a matter of how fast, it's also how cheap. Because for example, of course, we can just throw 10 CPUs and ideally parallelize that work, but the issue is that it will still cost that amount of single CPU core time. So I think that having and before I answer your question, I want to tell you what would we gain by having faster SNARKs. By having faster SNARKs, we would have cheaper mining, because you don't have to parallelize in CPUs in order to generate proofs faster. So you don't have to buy more CPUs. The CPU cost, so your energy cost is going to be lower. And then the most important thing is that if we drive down, and if we drive down a lot the cost of GPU, then the cost of proof generation, then we could take advantage of running larger circuits. Let me give you an example. You've seen that we had the proof generation cost and the Merkle tree cost. The Merkle tree is currently generated with Pedersen. If we could be using Blake 2, the cost would be 200 times faster. Now, but then you increase 10 times, then you increase the cost of 10 times, because the difference between Pedersen and Blake 2 is of about 10 times when you use them inside of the SNARKs. So having faster GPU will not just save us in time and cost, would also allow us to use a faster Merkle tree generation, which will increase even more the cost. So from our numbers, in order to get much better results, it would be about 5 times faster. Anything that is 5 times faster is already a major improvement in the Filecoin proofs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a point in which if you go beyond if you go beyond 10 times faster, then that's the ideal trade-off to stop using Pedersen, because if you don't use Pedersen and you now use Blake 2, yes, you have larger circuits. We have other ways to handle larger circuits, but then you also reduce the cost of Merkle trees, and we will be at a very good spot if we get more than 10x speed up.
Oh, thanks. And do you see that, like, the mathematicians that are working on the SNARK, basically the algorithms, I guess, do you see a 5x increase possible?
So this I will leave a little bit more to Ariel. He has been working on SNARKs for a long while. What I would say is that I'm expecting I would like to see an improvement, not necessarily on new SNARKs, that would be nice, but on the current constructions with faster algorithms or faster hardware. Let me give you an example. So that we stick with the current construction, and a different multi-exponentiation algorithm would give us 5x. That would be fantastic, because there's no need of a change in a construction. If someone comes up with a better SNARK construction, that would be beautiful on the theoretical standpoint. On the practical standpoint, we will need to maybe wait a little bit before people review, people peer review new theoretical breakthroughs. Ariel.
Yeah, so I agree. I think, like, in terms of constructions, this Grad 16 that everybody's using is sort of optimizes what you can get, unless a really totally different kind of thing comes up from nowhere. I think a better place to look is, yeah, one level down the stack, these elliptic curve operations, construct software and hardware that is specifically, for these curves that we're using. And actually, Nicola can correct me if I'm going to say now something wrong, but I think it's pretty sure we're going to use the pair of curves from zk-SNARKs, because we need one level of recursion because that lets us split the huge circuit into a few circuits and then do a proof about proofs. So specifically looking at the zk-SNARK code and optimizing the two curves there, the 377 and the SW6. And I was hinted, especially on the SW6, there may be low-hanging fruits. That could, I think that's a really good direction.
Thanks for that. So about SNARKs, real quick, do SNARKs solve this 5x problem for the computation of the proof pretty decently, or does that have anything to do with that? Since
So
they have the specialized, the hardware basically that you were kind of mentioning, that they use specific hardware.
you're saying they have dedicated hardware?
Yeah, as far as I understand, Starks require a specific kind of verifier or approver hardware. I mean, I'm not an expert in the field, but that's how I understood it, and that was kind of the downside, that Starkware was the only one of the few people that can make this hardware right now. But I was wondering if they had the computation that requires to make the proof down to the size that you guys were mentioning, like the 5 to 10x, or if that Starks even improve that at all.
So at a high level, the advantage of the Starks prover compared to the SNARKs is that they do simpler algebraic operations. Like in the SNARKs, you have the field operations, but then you have these group operations in elliptic curves. And in the Starks, you just need field operations. I don't know anything about custom hardware and what the state of that is. I would guess even that's less crucial for Starks because they only do field operations. It's really hard to estimate the trade-off that they give you here. It's possible they would give you better prover runtime, but it's really tricky to estimate because in general, the Stark prover is faster than the SNARK prover, but it only works for you have to write your program in a very structured and limited way. You can't use like a general circuit like you can do in SNARKs. So you really have to look at your specific program and see how much it will increase the description size to write it in the form that the Stark prover can eat. There's also the thing that then the proof itself would be much larger. So then you have to calculate, right? It's a totally different trade-off because your basic, right? Your whole thing here is like saving space on the blockchain, right? If you didn't care about saving space on the blockchain, then you would just write all the Merkle paths themselves as the proof. You wouldn't put anything in a SNARK or a Stark. So, and the proofs in Starks are larger, so it's complicated to compute the trade-off. If I would just have to guess yes or no, I would guess that no, they won't help you here.
Okay, thanks. Pretty sure. Also, I guess you guys probably saw this already, but they seem to have come out with some kind of new zero-knowledge proof called deep SNARKs. If you guys know anything about that.
Yeah, actually, I just saw a presentation about that. This thing they call deep fry. There's something tricky about estimating the time, the size of the proof there. Because basically there's like a basic proof that there's a certain probability of cheating, and you have to give many copies of this basic proof so there's different estimates based, on the one. So there's some lower bound of I'm absolutely sure that this is enough to get this security. But then if you look at this fry paper and deep fry, they have conjectures of, okay, but I'm going to assume this conjecture about Reed-Solomon codes, and then it's enough to make the proof I don't know, 30, 50 kilobytes instead of 100 kilobytes or 20 kilobyte, and it's still secure. So I think this deep fry paper looks pretty interesting, and I think it improves also what you can say conditionally and unconditionally about how big the Stark proof needs to be. And I think they're under their optimistic conjectures, they can do now 20 kilobyte proofs, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. 20 kilobytes, that would be the proof size on chain, or the
Yeah.
Mhm. That's all I had. I have no more questions.
Are there any other questions out there?
For those that will be watching this in streaming, I wonder in recorded version, I wonder, Ariel, I have a question for you, which is if you would be suggesting things to look for optimizations for how to make current SNARKs faster, not necessarily on GPU, but this competition is on GPU. So what would be your suggestion to those that are working on this competition?
I don't know, like, you know, from my intuition that I'm not sure how good it is, the best thing would be specialized hardware for the curves you're using. I would like not, my intuition is, you know, don't look at the SNARK as you know, look very low level at the basic field and group operations, specifically in the field and group the SNARK is using, and see if you can get those base operations to be faster. And I don't have much intuition if just without specialized hardware on CPU, how much hope there is there. I'm not sure. Oh, except again, as I was told today, that for this SW6 curve, it looks like there could be some easy optimizations of the zk code.
Awesome. Are there any other questions out there? Because we're kind of hitting up on 45 minutes. So probably have time for one or two more questions if there are any out there.
Otherwise, I have one more idea that people can look into. I've looked into this a little bit myself. Is unclear how much benefit it will have, but it seems that SIMD optimizations on especially new instruction sets, especially AVX512, are interestingly enough to benchmark much more deeply. Specifically for the various big number operations. Some big number libraries have started experimenting with them, some with some success, some with not. There's not a lot of work that has gone deeply into this, but if AVX512 extensions become more available, hopefully with the next generation of Intel CPUs, there's a possibility that there's things doable there, but testing out on the exact algorithms that are useful to apply here to do. And that's something that Bellman does not at all uses today for the sexy.
Got it. Hey, thank you guys so much for this. This was really awesome. I know everyone in the competition is going to get a lot out of this, and we'll be sure to share the video as well. Where can people find out more about what you guys are working on and stay up to date on everything Filecoin?
Yeah, so you can, I think, I forgot to which microphone to use, sorry. You can, so there are a bunch of links dropped in the chat already that you can use. There's a mining mailing list for miners. I'm also going to post the slides as soon as I know where the place to post them is. We're just going to include all of these links. There's a community chat, which also is linked in the chat currently. You can find a link to that as well, Filecoin.io, which probably to remember. I think most of the things are linked from there at the bottom.
Awesome.
Otherwise, on github.com, Filecoin-project.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be sure to include all of these links in the YouTube video as well. Thank you guys so much. And yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.